Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, September 18th here in the United States, and it is 9:46 a.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Ed Collab gathering. Welcome to all of you, wherever you are in the world. I was just looking at some of our stats, so hi. Basically in many continents. Hi, thank you for joining us this morning. We're so happy that you're here. So a couple of here's how the day works if you're new or if you're returning. And then I'll have some opening remarks for you. And then we will introduce Hena, our incredible keynote. So first, here's how the Ed Collab gathering works. So the Ed Collab gathering, let me say this. Actually, we were talking with Hena about this morning. It's pretty funny. Before the pandemic, the Ed Collab gathering was kind of unique. Like there weren't a lot of conferences that were all online that you could watch from anywhere in the world. And so anyone that presented with us, we oftentimes would go through a lot of training. Here's how you share your screen. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. But now everyone's a Zoom pro. So anyone can join, including you, and we'll invite you later today to actually submit some proposals to join us in spring. So a lot of what I'll share here, you are likely already pro at, but just in case, here we go. So the gathering, just like a lot of our school lives for the past 18 plus months, has been totally online. And so the gathering is a completely free, no registration, just click to join conference. So here's a way that you can click to join. So if you are watching right now on our website, what you'll go to is our webpage, gathering.theeducatorcollaborative.com. And right on the top of that webpage, or wherever you see the screen right now over there, right on the top of the webpage, you'll see all of the drop-down menus that help you go to all of our sessions throughout the entire day. Each of those sessions will be broadcast to you right at their time. So the 11 a.m. Eastern sessions will start right at 11 a.m. Eastern. After that, they are all recorded on the site and will stay there until our spring gathering in April. So what's nice about this conference is you can watch something live, and then like when you're in person, when you wish you could be in two rooms at the same time, now you can watch one and then you can head over to the other. So for example, if during session one, I wanted to watch Tawanda Harris's session, I could go over to session one on that drop-down menu and then boom, click it right there. Now, if you're watching online, maybe you're on Twitter right now, and then you click the YouTube link, or maybe you're watching us over on YouTube. All of our sessions are also broadcast live on our YouTube channel, and all of the links to those will be shared out throughout the entire day on our Twitter handle at the Ed Collab. So if there's an issue with the website, or if you're on a device that you can't access our website, just find all the YouTube links there, or you can go to our YouTube channel and you should be able to find all the sessions there as well. And again, each of them will start right on the hour. When you are on a page on our website, a couple of tips. One is wait for the start time. You'll see a little countdown on the bottom, or make sure you press play. Right now, you may have pressed play in order to watch this opening. So make sure you press play right in the middle. If something's not happening, like you pressed play and it says no video, or you press play and it's the wrong video, or something's happening, sometimes that happens. The internet gremlins come and kind of mess with our day a bit. When that happens, we have an incredible behind the scenes volunteer team that finds the issue, and within as short as a minute to as much as maybe 10 minutes, we solve the problem. So if you're on a page and something doesn't look right, just hit refresh, wait a little bit, hit refresh again, and very shortly we'll fix it. Your best place to go throughout the entire day is our Twitter handle, because if there is an issue, like there's the wrong video up or a link isn't working or something, we'll tweet about it there and then we'll let you know when it's fixed. So you'll find it all there. Today, because we're not in person, the one thing that doesn't feel as good. The good side is you can watch from anywhere at any time. The not so good side is you can't like go up to Tawanda after her session and be like, Tawanda, that was so inspiring, you're so amazing, which she is. So what we invite you to do, and in fact, I'll say it this way, we don't just invite you to do this, we ask if you could do this. When you're watching a session that you're inspired by, or even after a session that was amazing for you, could you please tweet the presenters? The best way to do that is to tag two things. Tag hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, So if you use that hashtag, we at the Ed Collab will see it, and anyone else who is joining us today might be following that hashtag too, and we'll see it as well. But can you also tag the presenters? Whenever we have a presenter's Twitter handle, you'll always find it near the bottom of their bio on their page. So if I'm like, Tawanda, this is so amazing, think that in your mind and heart, but also let Tawanda know. Please let her know. And you can find her Twitter handle and tweet her and say, Tawanda, this session is so amazing, hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering. So thank you for that. Because this day is our gift to the education community, every September, every April, we present to all of you because we love our literacy community. We love what you do, and we're so grateful that you're part of this field. Because this day is free, what we do ask you to do every gathering is to help us pay the joy forward. So instead of spending $5 on coffee that you may have gotten in the convention hall, or instead of the money you would have spent having lunch with a colleague during a lunch break, instead of spending maybe what you would have spent on registration for a day like this, consider paying the joy forward. Each gathering, we ask our opening and closing keynotes to adopt a charity. Today's charities, you can see they're on your screen. And if you click either the Adopt the Charity link, or you click one of those icons over on the side, or follow us on Twitter at the Ed Collab. There will also be sharing out direct links to the charities throughout the day. If you feel inspired today, if you feel moved, if you feel grateful, if you feel calmer, if you feel energized, anytime you feel a good feeling, we'd ask you to consider, instead of paying for registration, instead of paying for lunch, instead of paying for a coffee or a water or whatever, think about how you could pay that joy forward. And one great place to do that is to give the funds you would have spent here to one of these amazing charities that our keynotes have adopted for us today. And if right now you're in a situation where giving money to a charity isn't possible for you, then think about other ways that you can pay today's joy forward. And that might be through volunteerism, that might be through a form of activism, whether in person or online, or perhaps it's just sharing the joy you got from today and the inspiration from today and sharing that happiness with others who really need it. So whatever you would normally spend in a moment like today, both through your energy and perhaps through your funds, please consider a way of sharing that forward. And again, you can find our charities as well as direct links to their donation pages and a little explanation from our keynotes of why they chose those right on the Adopted Charities page. Here at the Ed Collab, my colleagues and I, we provide in-school and remote professional development. We're doing that right now. We work with many schools all around the country and around the world. We provide that both in school and remotely. So if you're interested in finding ways that you can learn with us or with some of our colleagues, please go to theeducatorcollaborative.com. And there you can click on remote learning support or consulting support. You also, as you can see at the top of that page there's lots and lots of other things that you can click on to, including a bunch of free resources from us. Okay, so that's all the how-to-dos for today. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to share just a couple of thoughts to get us in kind of the right headspace for this morning, for this day of learning, and then I'll introduce our incredible keynote. Okay, join me in this. Please take a deep breath. I really mean it. Take a deep breath. Clear it out of your lungs. Feel how the breath goes in your body and goes back out. There's a chance that you may have been holding your breath. You may have been holding your breath for quite a while. You may have been holding your breath for 18 months or almost 2 years. You may have been holding your breath since the start of the school year, for your own safety, the safety of your children, the safety of your community, safety of your own kids that you send to school. You may still be holding your breath. Right now is a lot. It's a lot. I thought March 2020 was a lot. It was. I thought April 2020 was a lot, and it was. And I thought all of last school year was a lot, and it was. And somehow right now feels like even more. there's so much, so much going on to date, at least in recent estimates. As a global society, we've lost 4.5 million people to COVID alone. Here in the United States, more than 500,000 people, on our way to 1 million people, have died from just this virus. And so much more continues to go on around us. I want to take just a moment to just pause with your thoughts. Before we move ahead, it feels respectful and right, like we've done for every gathering since this all started, to just think about the people who are missing and to think about how we can carry their work forward. So I want to invite you, we'll just take a brief moment to pause and reflect. Some of these are people you know. Some of these are people you read about. Some of these are people that are in that 4.5 million. I can't even wrap my head around that number. Some of them are people that you've lost for other reasons. But when someone's missing, there's a void that's hard to fill. But there's also an opportunity to carry their work forward. So I wanted to talk with you just briefly about this morning. Is a feeling that I've heard a lot of you say, and I feel it too. Does what I'm doing right now even matter? Everything feels like too much. Too much. Does me being in a classroom saying, so today we're going to add quotes to our essays, does that matter when what we could be saying is wildfires are raging and COVID is terrifying and our civil rights are being stripped away, and there's so much going on all the time. Right now feels harder than it's felt before. And so many educators, so many people outside of education, so many people in my life and yours, maybe you, I know I am, asked, does what I do even matter? It all feels like too much. How do I, one person, deal with 4.5 million people around the world being lost? How do I deal with the amount of division and frustration and political angst that's happening? How do I deal with all of it? Does it matter that I'm teaching kids how to cite sources? And so what I want to suggest to you this morning is this. What we have in our hands, what we have in our toolbox, what we have in our classrooms as literacy educators are pieces that can connect. They're tools that can connect. Literacy is a powerful medium to connect. And what we need right now, probably more than anything else, is connection and community. I personally don't agree with the government leaders that have, I'm going to say, forced schools to reopen. I think that as a parent, I should have a choice if my child goes back to school. I think that as an educator, you should decide if you feel safe in your buildings or not. You could agree or disagree with me on that point. That's fine, but that's how I feel. But if that's what we're doing, if a lot of us are now back in buildings, if a lot of us are now back in person, or even if you're still on Zoom, what can we do right now to connect us, to make the most of this moment where everyone has to do everything now, where we all have to be together? And what I want to suggest to you is that you use your literacy to connect. Kids are not all right now. They're not. I know a lot of kids in my life that are not okay. Adults are not all right now. They're not. I know a lot of people in my life right now that are not okay. I don't feel okay either. But when we use the power of reading, the power of writing, the power of speaking, the power of listening to connect, to build community, to feel each other's energy, that's healing. That's what matters. And so does what I do matter? In the grand scheme of things, yes, but I want to suggest this to you. If you feel like, is teaching kids to cite sources the right thing to do today? Feel that little feeling inside of your body and say, you know what, maybe it's not. And maybe there's a reason I'm feeling that. And maybe what I can do is still be a literacy teacher. I can still teach English or reading or writing or whatever your period is called. But instead, maybe what I'll do is a read aloud. Maybe I'll get out a book that we as a community can read together, no matter if I teach 12th grade or first grade or somewhere in between. I'm going to get out a book and we'll read together, to read, to be close to each other. Or maybe I'll say, you know what? I feel like we need to take 5 minutes to journal because I have a lot going on in my mind, and I think you might too. Let's write, or let's type, or let's on Zoom go into breakout rooms and use those speaking and listening standards that so many of us pretend not to ignore and talk to each other. But if you feel that urge inside of you that maybe today, the thing that I plan to do, I need to diverge from for just a few moments, or for this whole period, or for Friday, I'll plan something differently. Remember that you still can teach literacy, but you can use the tools that we have to make connection. And I mean it. I'm not just saying some like goofy thing. I really mean it. Take the time that you have and the tools and the power that you have as a literacy educator to use reading, to use writing, to use speaking, and especially to use listening, to build community that your kids need right now, even if they aren't showing it to you, because so many kids are hiding it. And to build community with your colleagues, even if you think that that's not what you need right now, because so many of your colleagues are hiding it. And to write about your fears and your pain and your hopes, because you might be hiding it too, but literacy gives us the tools to connect. And if we use what we know to matter, it helps everyone know that they matter too. Yes, you do, and your kids do, and we all do. Use literacy to connect. I challenge you that for today. So it is my great, great pleasure to introduce to you this morning's keynote, Hena Khan. I was introduced to Hena Khan's work, I think it was like 2017-ish, when I learned about a brand new imprint called Salam Reads. And Salam Reads was an imprint that aimed specifically to produce books by Muslim authors about Muslim kids and families, to show the wide-ranging, diverse humanity of all Muslim people. And it is an incredible imprint. And I am so glad that the first book I picked up from that imprint was Amina's Voice. As you can see, it is full of many, 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 many Post-it notes, because I read this book with students often. If I were to do a read aloud because my community needs it, this might be a book that I would choose. I love Amina. I love her story. I love this book. And on top of that, Hena Khan is just a really awesome person. I had the pleasure of, I think it was at the Wisconsin State Reading Association conference. We got to eat lunch next to each other one day. And Hena has been a great supporter of the Ed Collab, and we 100%, million% support and love her work too. Hena is the author of many, 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 many books. You can find all of her books on her website, henakhan.com. You can also follow her on Twitter. Make sure you put books at the end of her name, @HenaKhanBooks. There she has resources for kids, for educators, ways to contact her, invite her to speak to your school. And I invite you, if you don't have it open already, open a tab. And in that tab, please type Zara's Rules for Record Breaking, because this is Hena's brand new book that's coming out April 19th, and you can pre-order it right now. So yes, take a second while I invite Hena on. Hena, you can unmute yourself and come on and say hello. While Hena's joining us, please make sure you open up a tab, Zara's Rules for Record Breaking. You can pre-order that now. It is my great, great pleasure to introduce to you, reintroduce to you our keynote for this morning. Hena, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for those beautiful and moving words. That was the perfect way to start today. And I felt like I really needed to hear that. And I needed to take that breath myself. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Amy, Jessica, everyone who put this together. Thanks to all of you out there who are here, taking the time out of your day to hear me speak. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. And I'm really grateful for the friendship of Chris and the Ed Collab over the years. As a virtual community, you do so much to support authors like me, and I've felt the love, and it's been really meaningful and important to me, especially in these times. I feel like Chris said, it's just, it feels like one disaster after the next is just beating us down. And You give me a lot of hope and comfort, and I truly am grateful for all of you. And I'm excited to talk with you today. I'm going to actually try to share my screen again. A little bit of technical difficulty this morning, but hopefully this works okay. All right, so far so good. Here we go. All right. Hopefully that is looking okay. What I wanted to chat with all of you about today was moving beyond tolerance. And as you know, I'll start by saying many of you probably heard, excuse me, that we had an eventful week in the kidlit space. There was a bit of buzz about books being banned in a certain part of the country, including one of my own. And I didn't actually pay a lot of attention to it at first, because sadly, this wasn't the first time something like this happened. But it got more and more attention. And I'm glad that it did, because it was a welcome change, maybe from things like this that happened in the past and didn't get as much attention. And of course, it's heartbreaking and it's frustrating, and I don't want to dwell on it too long, other than to just say thank you to all of you, because of the work that you do, because of your passion for inclusion and diverse books. The swell of resistance was there to initiatives like this, and the librarian who actually tagged me initially. I think it was a TikTok, an educator sharing this list of proposed banned books. She said something like, that's like half my library, right? And the fact that you all are firmly committed and already owning these books, says a lot about, what it means to try to pull those out of the space and what they mean to so many people. So I just wanted to say thank you. I also think it's safe to assume that all of us who do accept diversity as a value and strive for inclusion have heard a lot of compelling stories about why the voices that have been shut out of the mainstream for too long deserve to be there. Like Chris mentioned, Salam Reads was created for that express purpose by Simon & Schuster, and I was super honored to have my book, Amina's Voice, launch that imprint, because I knew what it felt like to be on the outside for many years. And to feel like, even though I had published picture books and was so grateful to Chronicle Books and others for publishing me, I felt like it was this constant beating down of this massive door, to let me in, and to have this space that was created to welcome writers like me and others like me, and to, say that our stories mattered, was really meaningful. And I think we talk about books being windows and mirrors and sliding doors. We all know that very well. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's thoughts on this. And I actually like this cartoon by Grant Snyder that shows books as windows, mirrors, sliding doors, and all these other wonderful things that we all know them to be. And I think recently we've talked a bit more about, I think maybe initially in the conversation, we focused a lot on books as mirrors for kids and the kids who had been left out for so long, and the need for seeing themselves. And, we heard all that testimony. And like I said, I gave a lot of that testimony about why, it was so important to have mirrors. But I think a lot more maybe lately, we're talking about the need for these windows and sliding glass doors, and for kids to see kids who are different than them. And a phrase that's often used is, needing diverse books to promote tolerance and understanding and compassion. And I've used that phrase a lot myself when talking about my own books. But more and more lately, I've been thinking about how much work I've done and continue to do, really, to justify the existence of my books in a way. To convince others that they carry a loftier purpose than just entertaining kids or, good storytelling, and that instead they have more to them, right? They're there to normalize people like me, to demystify, and of course to include kids like mine and others. And in saying that, they're promoting tolerance and understanding and compassion, of course, I feel proud that they may be doing those things. But now I realize that it is kind of exhausting to have to keep explaining why I write what I write and why I think it should matter. And in some ways, I'm starting to realize that it might even be somewhat problematic. This is the first time I'm talking about this, so forgive me if it's a little disjointed, but I felt like it was important to say, and these are things I've been thinking about a lot. But what does it mean to tolerate someone? When I think of it like that, I thought about people I've tolerated over the years. I thought about this neighbor I had who reported me to the HOA because he didn't like the position of my satellite dish on the roof of my townhouse, right? I had to live with him, even though he was really, really annoying. There was an IT person at work who was really condescending toward me when I needed tech help. And Chris saw me this morning panicking when I didn't know how to share my screen. And he was so patient and showed me how to do it. There was this auntie who always made really snarky comments about my clothing when I would, see her at parties and celebrations. And, I thought about these people and how, excuse me, I put up with them, right? I tolerated them. I accepted that they were the way they were, that I wasn't going to be able to change them, and it wasn't my job to try. And, so in a sense, I just was dealing with them. But when we go back to children's books, when I wrote Amina's Voice, it was more than 8 years ago when I first was drafting it. And at that time, we need diverse books. WNDB, the nonprofit now, was in its infancy. There was very little middle grade fiction out there that featured Muslim characters and none that featured Pakistani Americans. And so I wrote the book I wanted to write, like I wanted to have exist in the world. And you've probably heard many authors say over the years that they wrote for a younger version of themselves or for their children and so on. And I think that was true for me too. But I also remember intentionally writing for others. And I did write for tolerance in a way. I remember thinking, I'm going to show people what it's like to be part of a Pakistani American family, because maybe they don't know any. And what it's like to grow up balancing two cultures and feeling the way I felt when I was growing up. And I feel like many other kids do. And I also thought specifically about setting scenes at the mosque, a place that I thought that people might be skeptical of or unsure of or just curious about. I wanted to show them all the mundane, boring things that happen there, like pizza lunches and fundraisers and book fairs. And I wanted to show that there was nothing strange or sinister or suspicious happening there. And I hope that that would promote some tolerance or acceptance for my community. Because I knew that in a post 9/11 world, people had a lot of questions about Muslim people and what we believe and how we practice our faith. And of course, we all reflected recently on the 20th anniversary of that terrible day and how it affected not only us individually, but collectively as a country and globally. And like all Americans who were old enough to remember that day, of course, it's seared in my memory. And, it was because of the tragedy, the loss, the fear of, for our nation, the sinking realization that life was going to change for all of us. But there was another layer for me personally, as an American Muslim, that my faith was in the spotlight and, really for the first time in my life, and not for a good reason. This is my baby boy, who is now 20 years old, which is hard to believe. But he was 6 months old when 9/11 happened. And I remember watching the news, and he was cooing and lying on the carpet in my family room and, completely oblivious, like he should have been. And I remember just crying and watching the news and trying to get in touch with my husband, who was working in DC at the time. And I was just so scared, right? We all were scared. But I remember looking at my son and just being so afraid of what his childhood might end up being like, and comparing it to what mine was like, where, people didn't really know in many cases what the word Muslim meant. And I just, that was maybe one of the challenges I had growing up, was feeling invisible. And I knew that he wouldn't have that same experience. And I was just, second guessing the strong Muslim name I gave him, and just afraid of the backlash that he might face. And of course, in the days that followed, we did hear stories of people being attacked, and women in hijab and Sikh men in turbans who were mistaken for Muslim. And we all wondered what to do. And I never saw more Muslims put up flagpoles with American flags in their yards and in front of their homes, because I think everybody felt, just afraid, and this need to try to, show their allegiance to the country. But in it, and we kind of made, fun of that in a way, but at the time, look how scared everyone is. But at the same time, they had the right idea, because people did have really frightening misperceptions and misinformation about who Muslims were, and jumped to conclusions like we tend to do sometimes. And they tended to think that the twisted acts of, and criminal acts of some extremist, outliers of the faith represented everybody. And sadly, we saw that these views really allowed the seeds of Islamophobia to take root and flourish. And we've seen it continue through today. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons for that, or the industry that, really does profit off of fear mongering. But in case you're interested, there actually is a really good, well-researched report called Fear Incorporated that was put out by the Center for American Progress, which is a liberal-leaning think tank, so full disclosure. But I know one of the authors of this report, and it just really goes into the background and the real concerted effort that was made and continues, in spreading Islamophobic thought. But that's an aside. But my point is that really, 20 years later, we see a lot of the same challenges, and we live in a world where we have so much access to information that we didn't have years ago. And yet we are still so divided on how we get stories, how we receive information, how we interpret news, and how we see each other, of course. And sadly, we see these effects on kids, and how much, part of it is that people still have just very limited basic understanding of who Muslims are. They don't realize that Muslims make up a quarter of the world's population, right? The global population. We're almost 2 billion people on the planet, of every race and ethnicity and background, and as diverse as any other community in every way. And I don't think people realize in the US that American Muslims come from almost 80 different countries, that the single largest country of origin is surprisingly Pakistan. I didn't know that myself. And that a lot of times Muslims get equated with Arabs and vice versa, which is inaccurate. But only 26% of all American Muslims come from Arab heritage, which is, I think a lot less than a lot of people would assume. And actually, this number is wrong. I'm sorry, I forgot to update it. The percentage of American Muslims that are African American is 30%. So a very significant part of American Muslims, which often isn't considered. A lot of times people think of Muslims as immigrants, coming from foreign lands, speaking other languages, and they forget that the largest percentage of American Muslims are African American and have been here for generations. And so here we see the percentage of Muslims broken down by generation, and 65% or so are first generation Americans, like my parents are immigrants. Second generations, that orange slice, like me, people who were born from immigrants or two immigrants, I should say, and then about a fifth or third generation or longer, right? And so many Muslims have been here for many generations. But anyway, back to the role of tolerance and promoting understanding and compassion. In Amina's voice, I write about a girl who loves to sing, who is very stage shy, who was dealing with changes in middle school around her friendships and trying to find confidence. It's dealing with jealousy, changes in her family and so on. But I also included a mosque vandalism incident. And when I wrote about that, I actually thought back to the fear that gripped my community, my local area. I live in Maryland in Montgomery County outside of Washington, D.C. And I thought about how terrifying it was as a kid when local synagogues would from time to time be desecrated with anti-Semitic graffiti. And it was horrifying, and something that stayed with me as I grew up. And sadly, it did happen more than once. And in the decade before I wrote Amina's Voice, I was increasingly hearing of acts of vandalism and arson of mosques in, around the country. And I wanted my readers to get to know this special place and what it means to Amina and her family, and the pain and confusion and fear that she would then feel when this special place was, attacked. And I based the book in Milwaukee, which is where my husband grew up, and the mosque that I visited there with his family, even though the mosque I describe is actually the mosque here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And my husband told me about his father and his uncle and how they had painted the walls of the first mosque in Milwaukee themselves. And so that went into the book. And I'm so, so grateful for the response that Amina's Voice got and continues to get, thanks to Chris and others who share it widely. And, it honestly exceeded my wildest expectations and continues to in every way. My picture books have gotten a nice amount of love too, but Amina's Voice was my first contemporary middle grade, and it really blew me away to hear stories of how people were reacting to it and embracing it. And, when the Washington Post and others named it a best book, I was so overjoyed, and I just couldn't believe it. And especially when RJ Palacio said, for inspiring empathy in young readers, you can't get better than this book. Like, I literally cried. And that quote went on the front cover of the paperback, which is where it lives still. And so inspiring empathy, again, promoting tolerance, encouraging compassion, all great things. And, like I said, I think it's a good goal and I'm proud of it. But at the same time, when I sit back and think about it and what that really means, like, those are really fundamental emotions, right? That we really should all have as humans. And the fact that we have to work so actively to try to promote basic decency and kindness, maybe I'm starting to think is too basic as a mission. And maybe we do need to move beyond tolerance and, really move towards respect. And that's what I'm thinking I need to aim for, a higher goal. And a word I'm going to use more than tolerance is respect. And, the Queen of Soul got it right. And I've thought about this a lot, and I've written about this. This is an article I wrote about specifically, the targeting of Muslim children. And sadly, we're seeing statistics, nationally representative surveys that say that more than 50%, or up to, in some places, and 50% nationally, 50% of American Muslim kids nationally have reported being bullied or discriminated against at school. So it's a serious problem. But beyond that, we also, we see that sort of originate in maybe more casual ways. We hear, just what I think characterizes as hate speech, but I think a lot of times people haven't called it that yet, or put it along with other hateful language that we know, or kids know that not to use. So we hear about Muslim kids being, called terrorist, or being called ISIS, or just horrible things. And it's a serious problem. And I think that, we have to try harder to respect each other, not just tolerate, right? Not just put up, but really try to understand each other's beliefs and worldviews. And, we're living in a country where more and more we see how polarizing it's become, and how intolerant we all are about each other for thinking differently, looking differently, praying differently, voting differently, right? And it's just not headed in a good direction, and it's just leading to some awful things. So I've been thinking about, what if the goal is respect? And of course, tolerance and compassion and empathy are all wonderful things as well. I'm not trying to say those aren't, but I'm saying, in addition, what if we really try to focus on building respect? And what does that change for me as a writer, and for all of us who care about kids and care about literacy and want them to love books? It's subtle, I think, but there's a few things for me personally. First, I was thinking about how it really is harder to respect someone that you think is less than you in any way. And even if you don't, even if objectively you would say, of course not, but there's things that we absorb and messages that we absorb that suggest that people are less than us, or have less of a right than we do to exist. And so I decided that I'm not going to do anything to make my characters feel like they're less in any way, or feel like they're any less to my readers. And one way is that I don't feel like I should have to explain everything all the time. Of course, I'll include a glossary, for example, in my picture book if I have a lot of foreign words, or am explaining a concept, like in like The Moon Loves the Sky. These are my picture books, which I love creating. I'm actually working on a third book in the series here. This is my color book, and I have a shape book, and we're actually launching a number book that'll be coming out in the spring. This is the book that was on the ban list. But in Under My Hijab, I have a detailed author's note about why women may choose or not choose to wear the hijab, and when, and so on, because I felt like I wanted to explain that. I know people have so many questions about that and don't know where to look for information, basic, really simple, easy to understand information. And like The Moon Loves the Sky, I explain what the word inshallah means, which I use over and over in the book. And of course, I wanted people to know the significance to me. And so I still write, as I mentioned, books like these. I'm also doing a follow-up book to like The Moon Loves the Sky. And I feel like it's important when there is still so much misinformation and misunderstanding of Muslims. And I want, Muslim kids to have books that they can feel proud of and enjoy. And so, yes, I definitely feel like this is important. But at the same time, I don't think I need to, for example, highlight words in my novel and include them in a glossary. And I actually got a reviewer on Goodreads, and I know many authors don't read their Goodreads reviews, and I do. So if you're ever wondering if I've seen yours, I have, and I really, really appreciate them. And for the most part, they've been amazing. And I had this one reviewer who was positive, but she said, I wish that she had included a glossary in Power Forward, the first book in the Zaid Salim series, for words like salam and for the names of foods. And I kind of rolled my eyes at first. And then I thought about it more, like, what does that mean to sort of request or demand that you are catered to as a reader in that way, and that your comfort and familiarity is sort of paramount. And I don't want to have to assume that my audience is unfamiliar with what I'm writing about necessarily, or that they don't have access to Google, right? If they really want to know that biryani is specifically a chicken dish, spiced with, meat. And I think it's obvious if someone says assalamu alaikum when they're opening a door or answering the phone that it's a greeting, right? And we don't define what all of our greetings mean. So I think that's something that I've decided that, the kids who have been living in the margins deserve to just have their story and not have it be explained, because they know what it means, right? And I think everyone else can learn from context. And since, you're all educators and you're passionate about literacy, I wanted to share this amazing note I got from an educator just last week, talking about a fourth grader in her class who discovered Power Forward, that same book. And what she said, which I thought it just was everything I wanted to hear. She explained that he picked up this book, and she said, as he was reading, he became more and more animated and excited. First, he shouted out excitedly that he was pretty sure the main character was Muslim like he was. Then he was so thrilled to see that the main character spoke Urdu like him. He was also pumped that the main character loved sports. And she went on to say how she had only had that first book in this series, but went on to order the others. And while he was waiting for them to arrive, he reread Power Forward, which for me as a writer, like rereading, I'm like, oh, that's the ultimate, right? If you can get a kid to read your book more than once. And she said the Zaid Salim series became a well-loved set of books in our classroom. That one boy in particular read them over and over. I think he loved that he could connect with Zaid in so many ways, and it made him love reading. And I was like, yes. But what also made me happy, apart from this one kid, was that she talked about the books becoming a favorite in the classroom, because that's the windows and mirrors and what I was really hoping for. And that, this little boy gets to read a book where he's the hero, and that his friends get to see him be the hero. And that his family, his Urdu speaking, Muslim biryani eating family, is worthy of centering and, wanting to be a part of, right? They're a fun family. And I remember reading about Ramona Quimby and her family and kind of wishing I was part of it. And that's what I always aim for, these environments and circumstances that, aren't perfect, of course, and have moments of stress and, confusion and everything that kids feel, but, are welcoming, warm, comforting spaces. And something that my readers who do share my background can relish in. And, I thought about that too when I was writing more to the story. Oh, and real quick, these are just some of the things I do highlight, thinking of Rudine Sims Bishop. These are scenes from my picture books. And she talks about moving beyond food, folk, and festival when talking about multicultural books. But, of course, because Muslims are, like I said, so unfamiliar to so many people, I feel like I do write about food, folk, and festival. Here's a lot of scenes about food from my books, always a mix of Eastern and Western, because that's the way I eat. Traditions like the hijab, like different clothing, and then of course celebrations. So lots of fun things in my books. But yeah, this is the quote that the educator sent me about Power Forward, which made me really happy. And if you haven't seen it, this is the bind up cover. We realized that the series had a lot of basketball in them because they're basketball. Zaid's passion is basketball, but we realized that readers might assume that they're very, very sporty books, like a lot of sports books are, where it's like all sports, and they're not. So we actually did a very different looking cover for the bind up version, to sort of attract a different reader. And that's actually Zara in the background. And Chris mentioned my new series. Thank you, Chris, for mentioning the first book in the Zara series, Zara's Rules for Record-Breaking Fun, which comes out in April. I really do hope you all will read it and tell me what you think, because it was a book that brought me a lot of hope and joy during the pandemic, actually writing that series last year and into this year. A lot of antics and play and neighborhood silliness. And I mentioned Ramona Quimby, and that was a lot of the inspiration behind the Zara series. So I hope you will enjoy it. I also thought about, my favorite book when I was growing up, Little Women, and how when I was reading that book as a kid, there were so many things about that time period and the culture that I didn't understand. Things like pickled lemons. I don't know, for those of you who read Little Women, Amy gets in trouble for taking pickled lemons to school. Pickled limes. Pickled limes. I had no idea what pickled limes are, and I actually still don't know what pickled limes are. I thought I'm saying pickled lemons because I know preserved lemons are part of Moroccan cooking. But it didn't matter that I didn't know that, or what a dance card was, or whatever else, I didn't understand about the mid 1800s. And so in my Little Women inspired novel, More to the Story, I have 4 Pakistani American sisters, and I'm sure readers won't necessarily know every single thing I mentioned, but I don't think, and I hope that it won't take away from the joy of the book and getting to connect with these characters and, being a part of their life, right? Just the same way it didn't for me. The other thing I've been thinking a lot about is how I can, in terms of moving towards respect, is that I don't want to limit my stories. And I try really hard not to limit my stories to struggle or pain or oppression, because it really is hard to respect someone that you pity, right? I don't think you fully respect someone that you pity. And I do think that a side effect of some of the stories that we hold up and celebrate is that kids can end up pitying the protagonists. And specifically, talking about Muslims, since that's what I've been focusing on, and I'm on the topic, a lot of books do reinforce certain narratives that are out there that are negative when it comes to Muslims, or even just reinforcing certain stereotypes or prevailing thoughts of Muslims that aren't always accurate or representative. Muslims as immigrants, like I mentioned, are being foreign, as victims of war or poverty, as refugees, servitude, child marriage, radicalization, and then even bullying and discrimination, right? Like those are all real issues and concerns and things that the community does face, but it seems that there might be a disproportionate focus on those types of issues. And I know that there's a strong focus on, overcoming adversity and resilience and persevering. And I know as educators, there's a lot of focus, I think important focus on social justice issues and advocacy and activism. And that's very admirable. But I just feel like it's important to be conscious of the messages that we might be sending kids without realizing it sometimes. And I was talking to a librarian friend who was telling me about her assistant who was reading books to kids during story time and how she was picking books from, diverse backgrounds. But a lot of them had the same theme of the protagonist being bullied and then, overcoming it in some way, and how the kids, she got the sense that the kids are sort of relieved, like, oh, well, I'm glad I'm not part of that group, because it seems hard, right? And I thought about that in a tweet that an educator had sent out when I was writing the sequel to Amina's Voice, Amina's Song. And I was also thinking about the seminal article that Deneen Milner wrote that I'm sure many of you have read some years ago from the New York Times about, this balance that we need. And that's what I've been thinking about a lot. And I think that was also why I enjoyed writing the Zara series so much. And like I said, it's important to have kids, have that balance. Of course, life is full of ups and downs, and kids deal with serious issues as well. But they definitely need that. It can't all be pain and oppression and struggle. And of course, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the idea of the danger of the single story. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's seminal TED Talk, which is brilliant. If you missed it for any reason, please do watch her TED Talk on the single story. I think it's an amazing thing to share with students as well. But the whole notion of, what we absorb and how oftentimes it does get whittled down to one narrative and one story that becomes the dominant story. And so that's something I thought about as well when writing Amina's Song, the sequel to Amina's Voice, and how it didn't have to be that way, right? And so when she faces some reactions to what she's trying to do that aren't what she expects, and I was thinking about this idea of people pitying people who maybe seem like they're in unfortunate circumstances, right? It's not a natural response, and of course, pushing back against the single story, and she tries to do that in a creative way. And I do think, a lot of these mistakes, for lack of a better term, are, on the writer's part too, are unintentional. And, it's not meant to embarrass somebody about who they are or evoke pity necessarily. I think it sometimes can, and I just think we need to use these texts, of course, but maybe offer a countertext as well. And as I mentioned, Amina faces an unexpected reaction when she's looking for a hero. And right off of a trip to Pakistan, she comes back and does a school presentation, a living museum presentation on Malala, and ends up hearing, a comment, from a classmate who says, how horrible it is that, girls in Pakistan don't have any rights, and, and it starts to say, oh yeah, so lucky we don't live there, and she's like, wait, that's not what I wanted you to come away with at all. And that was me thinking about this other issue. On a lighter note, I don't know if you've heard of the Unicorn Rescue Society series, a really amazing initiative by Adam Gidwitz and his friends to put together this really fun series. And this was a chance for me to highlight my third point, which is that you don't have to necessarily give in to the single story or the dominant narrative as a writer or as a sharer of books. And it's amazing to be at a point where I'm beginning to feel like I have the freedom to, really share the stories that I want. And also have given myself the permission to share the stories that I want versus what I think other people expect or want to hear. And so I had the chance to work on book 6 of this series with Adam. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a pair of friends, Elliot and Uchenna, who go on adventures with their wacky Professor Fauna to save threatened mythological creatures around the world. And it's hilarious. Adam is really funny, just an amazing entertainer all around. And what's cool about the stories is that each one is set in a different region of the world, and they do focus on a social issue or something that's going on, a challenge in a very accessible and kid-friendly way. And when we decided to set our book in northern Pakistan, we thought a lot about, some of the challenges there, poverty, war, the spillover of the war in Afghanistan, Taliban activity as a result of that, political instability, et cetera. But we didn't want to focus on that because there's enough of that in the news. And that is not all that defines that region. So instead, we focused on the stunning natural beauty, really untouched peaks of the Himalayas in many places, the gracious hospitality and generosity of the people who would literally share whatever they have with strangers. And Adam actually brought up, he was like, how about we talk about Ibn Sabil, which is a concept from the Quran, because Adam knows everything. And I was like, wait, what? And it's this notion of, feeding the traveler and how that's something that's encouraged in Islam. And, as we were writing our different drafts, Adam kept saying, well, do you want to add a little bit more about Islam? And I was like, okay. So I added a scene where, they observe prayer happening, and he kept encouraging me to add more. And I added a scene with prayer beads and, different things like that. And, him encouraging me was really what encouraged me to do that. And here's some of the scene. This is the region of Pakistan. As you can see, it's up near the border with Afghanistan, and it's a really unforgiving terrain, but beautiful. Here they are sitting with a couple of locals, a wildlife watcher and a local boy wearing, the clothing and the hat, the Pathan hat, typical of the region, drinking tea as they do throughout the story. Oops. And here we see a prayer scene, which Hatem Ali is an Egyptian Canadian illustrator who has done the whole series, and he did an amazing job. But for me, it was just so exciting to have this book exist. Kids are reading about an adventure and a unicorn chase, and they have an encounter with Muslim people on the other side of the world who are kind and gentle, and they become good friends. So to me, that was really important. And again, all towards building respect. And finally, I can, really encourage my readers to think and to think bigger and to challenge what they hear, right? And like I already mentioned, when I was writing the sequel to Amina's Voice, Amina's Song, I thought about that a lot, about the messages we hear and how we process them. And it really is a book about belonging and being a whole person and pulling the different parts of yourself together in a way that feels right. And the story begins with Amina visiting her uncle in Pakistan. And it was based a lot on my own experience when I was around her age. And I thought a lot about the common impressions that people may have of Pakistan. When you imagine it, you may think of, impoverished villages or slums or hungry kids. And those are all parts of the reality of Pakistan, but it wasn't my experience at all when I went to visit. And I felt like that was important to share, a very different experience there, where, she's living in comfort and riding in an Uber and going to the market, and there's fancy malls there that she doesn't even want to go to because it's too much like home. But also in the book, Amina confesses her fears and anxieties about even visiting there because of what she's been hearing, right? All the news of bombings and markets and the Taliban being there has scared her, much as it had scared me and has prevented me from visiting for many years. And sadly, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to go, even when I finally was like, what are you doing? You need to go visit your family. And on the flip side, I hear stories of people from other parts of the world afraid to visit the US. A librarian friend was telling me about her family friends in Morocco who were afraid to send their child on a study abroad to the US because they hear about all the school shootings and mass shootings, and they feel like this is a really dangerous place. So of course, the single story again, and what we hear about each other and how that shapes, our views. And I also remembered when I was in Pakistan on this trip. So there I am. I think I'm 14 here, and the person I'm sitting next to, the person I'm leaning on is my dad, who was visiting with me. And on the other side is my uncle, my Daya John. For those of you who've read Amina's Voice, my uncle, my dad's older brother, inspired the Dayajan character in both Amina books. And he was very much like Dayajan in my books, like kind of gruff and serious and commanding, had this like Godfather-like aura, but just a sweetheart underneath, and super loving and thoughtful and wise. And we developed this really special bond like Amina does with her uncle. But my uncle, loved Pakistan so much and wanted us to love it. And he did sort of ask me to do what Amina's uncle asked her, which is, show people how special this place is. But Amina grapples with that, and reconciling a place that she loves so much and people that she loves so dearly, reconciling that with what she sees on the headlines and then the reaction she gets from other people when she talks about Pakistan. And so how do you love a place that is known for terrible things in some ways, or, in the news for the wrong reasons? And so that's something she has to come to terms with. But really the whole idea of knowing that there's more everywhere, than just the headlines. Both here in the US and of course everywhere else in the world. So I think, like Chris mentioned, it really is all about building community and getting to know each other better and being mindful about what we choose and how we talk about things. This was a school I had the privilege of visiting in Baltimore, and just an amazing experience where one of the students shared with me that before reading, they were all reading Amina's Voice, and I went in, and they actually weren't finished, but we had a roundtable conversation. It was like one of the most meaningful school visits I ever had. But during it, one of the boys who wasn't saying much spoke up and said, I come from a family that has taught me things like Islam hates America, which is, sort of grammatically incorrect too, but Islam's not a person, but Islam hates America, and that Islam teaches Muslims to kill Americans. And he said, I'm so grateful to be here, or glad. No, I don't think he's so grateful. He said, I'm so glad I can be here and learn the truth. But it was because we were sitting and talking and being really candid that he felt like he could share that. And, it was a safe space, and there was no shame, and there was no judgment. And, I was so grateful to him for sharing that with me, and to the school for, of course, for using the book and for inviting me and for being able to have that conversation. And I feel like, there's so much in the world to be down about. And like Chris mentioned, it's a lot. And, to what he started off by saying about, whether what we do matters. I know what all of you do matters so much, and I see it when I visit. And I know maybe when you're close to something, it's harder to see it. And when you're an outsider, it might be easier. And, I saw what this amazing educator was doing, and others, and these conversations we have, the fact that you are the people you are, all of that matters. And I went to my local bookstore, independent bookstores, the last couple of days in the DC area and in Northern Virginia. And I just left feeling so inspired and happy to be around people who love literacy, who love, kids, and get excited about books. It just, and believe in their power to make a difference and change the world and connect us. Like, that is something incredible. And so just, this is stuff I've just said, but just, if you want to take note of these just as little reminders, just some of the things to think about when approaching books about Muslim characters. one thing I didn't mention is that, not all kids do feel connected to their country of origin. Like my children are third generation Pakistani Americans who've never been to Pakistan because their mother hasn't taken them and really needs to. And so if they picked up a book that was, fully set in Pakistan about a Pakistani kid, they wouldn't necessarily relate to that character more than they would to a book by, crossover by, excuse me, Kwame Alexander, right? They both adored that book and they could completely relate to the main character. So that's something to think about. But I know many of you are already thinking of these things. Sorry, just, making these books accessible to all, including them on reading lists and so on. And here are some more resources about Muslims. Some of the things I mentioned, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding has that study that I mentioned. It's a nationally representative study about the bullying of American Muslim kids. They do have other great resources. There's an educator toolkit for countering Islamophobia. Unity Productions Foundations has some great documentary films and other resources. Islamic Networks Group has speakers that are available for guest speakers to talk about various themes. And of course, you might have heard of the Bridge Initiative, also has a lot of good resources, a safe website for students to visit. And the Pew Research Center, of course, has a lot of demographic data. If you'd like to connect with me, those are different ways you can do it, and I hope you will. And I hope, we all will work towards building more and more respect for each other. I know that's a big part of what you do already, but just different ways of thinking about how to approach diverse books. And, I know it's something that I just want to keep thinking about. So thank you so much for all the respect you have shown me and the honor of letting me speak with you today. The world is a better place for all of you being in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Hena, so much. Shukran. This was so inspiring. Number one, a lot of folks on Twitter and text messages I'm getting are like, every book she writes, I put in my Amazon cart. Just hold on a second. I'm dealing with that now. So thank you for what you do. Thanks for sending that message back to all of us. And it does mean a lot to have, I loved when you said, sometimes when you're so close to something, you can't really see the impact you have. And just hearing your perspective and with that one school as an example of what an educator can do to move kids ahead and make them more global and connected and respectful, not just tolerant. That really touched me and resonated for me. And so I'll say the same back to you, though I feel like I say this every time I see you. What you do matters so much too. So thank you for spending today with us. What a great way to start our day. And if you've been inspired, which of course you have, please do a few things. Number one, if you could stop sharing your screen, Hena, so I could share some. Thank you. A few things. Number one, please make sure that let me grab this. Follow Hena wherever you can. So follow her on henacon.com and at henacon books. Make sure you put books at the end of her Twitter handle. Many of you said you're already doing this. The books you don't already own, you can own them now. I also thank you for today. I'm correcting the way I say your character's name, Amina. I've been saying it the wrong way. So Amina, sorry, Amina, for that. I'll pronounce your name correctly now. Please pre-order her book, Zara's Rules for Record Breaking. And then really importantly, if today was inspiring to you, there are so many ways to pay the joy forward. Hena ended with a number of resources of how you can pay the joy forward in your practice, in the work that you do, in the text that you read, and just how you are as a person in the world. But I just wanted to share briefly, this is the charity that Hena has adopted for us today, KindWorks. KindWorks is an organization local to her that was co-founded by a friend and has grown to have several wonderful initiatives around welcoming and settling refugees, feeding families, providing laptops, and more. If you felt inspired and moved by today's keynote, as I have, please consider going to our charity page and paying that joy forward and sending monetary pay forward there if you can, or just send your energy to great places, including perhaps inspiring other people to give there as well. All three of our adopted charities are all found on that page. We'll talk more about the other two that Lorena has adopted a bit later. That's Elevated Thought Foundation and the Lakota People's Law Project. Coming up in just a few minutes is session 1. You can find that by clicking on that banner on the top of our homepage for today and just find the session you'd like to watch. We have sessions on divorcing grammar instruction from classism and white supremacy, on critical literacy practices during early childhood read-alouds, and as the world turns, creating space for students' voices and experiences in our classrooms. I also will say, all three of these presenters, I think, are just amazing people, and I enjoy them personally. So every single one of these sessions you will love to attend, so please do. And then enjoy your whole day. Find us back here for our closing keynote and our closing session at 3 p.m. this afternoon. If you are loving today, please tweet at the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, and you can tag Hena from this morning. Thank you all for all that you do. Thank you, Hena, so much for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for all that you do for your students, for your colleagues, and for our amazing profession. Enjoy the rest of your day. Tweet lots. Let the presenters know what you're learning from them. And thank you for being here together with us.